Fantasy, Lineage 2, and things like that. And typically, at a super high level, what that entailed is reverse engineering the client, seeing how it worked, and then finding ways to introduce unintended functionality, which is basically what hacking is finding ways to use things that aren't, intended. And that's basically my high-level background.
Excellent. For myself, I've been in the defensive side for, well, almost all my career, except a short path into pen testing. But yeah, so will be interesting to exchange on the different aspect associated with it. So let's start with skills, right? What skills got you into games, or is game got you the skills? So
yeah, so you definitely level up in the game in multiple ways. One is you grind through the game as the developers intended, or two, you cheat. I mean, there's different levels of cheating. You can download the trainer online. A trainer is typically an application that interacts with the game and lets you edit the game memory to like edit your gold value or edit items in your inventory. Typically, it's meant for single player games, and the typical concept of a trainer won't work in an online game. It's meant to manipulate client-side things. So back in the day in 97, 96, when I was playing online games, I was like, why can't I use my trainers in online games? So I just started examining how the workflow worked, how the login process works, what happens when you actually like move an item in your inventory or you drop an item in the inventory on the ground. If I uninstall my game, will my character still be there, when I install the game and log back in? That was kind of a scary thought. You play a game for 100 hours and you're like, it's online, but there's still the thinking of, if you uninstalled your game, all your save data will be gone, and that's not true in an online game. So I got curious in how the workflows worked. So the skill, if you're asking, I think it's more of curiosity is the number one driving factor. Is like, how does this thing work? And then naturally you find ways to ask the right what if questions. You see how something works, and then you're like, what if we try this? And then that kind of leads to unintended functionality and what you consider exploits.
I do agree that curiosity is, even on the blue side, something that's interesting and well, required essentially. But yeah, we cannot afford the time to be as curious as the other side,
Yeah.
right?
But
yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like in terms of skills, like back when I started, I had a basic knowledge of programming. Like, I think I was using like Windows 95 back then. They had a basic interpreter, so you could run like scripts basically. So that was my understanding of programming back then, as high level scripting languages. But to like dive into the clients, you had to understand how the operating system loads a game client into memory, what an instruction pointer is, how the CPU executes commands. So you start learning assembly, and that that's kind of, you're diving in way too deep. You're like, this is way too confusing. There's like 10 billion lines of assembly here. So you kind of take a step back and you go, right, so this is written in C. So I kind of understand the relationship between C and assembly and APIs, and how the operating system is basically an abstraction layer between the game client and the hardware and all the network communications and stuff like that. So curiosity will lead you towards the path of understanding programming languages and low level constructs of how the CPU operates and things like that. Yeah.
And this is how you get your badge as a hacker, essentially, because it's all about the learning. But getting into the defense side or the blue side, I mentioned we cannot afford that time, but and all the cool technical stuff, the assembly language hijacking, that memory allocation, usually we don't dwell too much into that. We have to rely on more soft skills as being I don't know, threat analysis, and then doing simulation scenarios, and then trying to influence decision maker into convincing them that it's really a potential threat, right? And we hardly can monetize them in the perspective of it's going to cost you, I don't know, X amount, so you should invest half of it in defender. So it's
Mhm.
quite difficult to actually, unless there's a major incident with, unless our game meets someone like you, right?
It's kind of funny talking about incidents because since 2017, I became a security analyst. I work for a security consultancy where we help Fortune 100 companies secure their products and services. And every now and then we get a client that says, "Hey, we got hacked. Can you help us?" Yes, but it would have been great if you came before the incident happened. But the incidents and threat actors and things like that, the motivations vary. So, you have to define your threat actors based on what the motivations are. If you're running a financial application or an application that has financial consequences, if it gets, exploited, then the threat actor skill level and number of them will increase, right?
Totally agree, and it's the difficult part to get, well, budget and investment into the more defensing perspective. Um, One topic I wanted to bring with you is ethics, right? And on the defense perspective, we know a lot about weaknesses. We might have known about some potential abuse case and such. So it's really key to maintain good ethics. And the definition of ethics, I won't go into detail. I'm taking the general umbrella one here. So I was wondering on the red side, or let's say on the hacking game perspective, what your take on ethics?
Yeah, so this is a pretty important question because I think I defined myself and maybe I coined the term that I was an ethical black hat hacker, right? Like my goal when going after MMOs was to provide products and services that the game company wasn't supplying in the first place. Back in the day, when you signed up for an online game, you typically bought a box which had a CD on, which is that dates ourselves. It's a foreign concept now, but we used to buy a box off the shelf. It had the game in it on a physical disk. You install it. You sign up online using like your email. You create a password, and then you put in your billing information because then they'll charge you like $15 a month to access the
Credit card.
service. Right? Yeah. So back then, that was the company's business model, and they didn't have in-app purchases. They didn't sell you like coins, or they didn't sell you like power-ups to level up your account and things like that. And so that's where I kind of stepped in. I was like, there's a lot of demand for virtual goods and items. So I started selling real estate and games on eBay. I sold coins and things like that, on eBay. And when eBay banned this practice because they had too many fraud cases from both sides, people would sell an item and the person receiving the item would falsely say, "I never received this item," or you'd buy it from a fraudulent seller and they'd never send you the item. So eBay was like, "We can't guarantee the transaction happened. We have no way to refund people, or we can't really say what happened." So they just washed their hands of it. They said, "We're not going to participate in this anymore." But anyway, going back to me and ethics, my underlying principle was that I wouldn't go after a game where I would potentially negatively affect the bottom line of the company. Like I didn't want to take away from their revenue. And in certain games that were targeted by lots of hackers, exploiters, farmers, and things like that. For example, I like to use the example of Final Fantasy Online. When that game came out, there were tons of botters. There were people teleporting to different like resources you could gather within the game, killing all the boss level monsters to get all the rare drops, and that was negatively affecting the players that wanted to play the game because they play the game, they want to go kill a boss to get some rare loot, and would be killed by like 20 million farmers that typically operated out of China or low income countries. But when I came in with an exploit and I was able to like generate infinite amount of money via basically abusing API calls, so I was able to create virtual goods out of thin air without negatively affecting the players and sell them online. And then I bring up Final Fantasy Online as an example because in that game I was able to drive away all the farmers because I was undercutting their prices, so they stopped farming in the game for a period of time that I was active in. And I heard that they all migrated to a different game, so it had an interesting effect that removing farmers from a certain game because I undercut them caused them to move in a different game. But so exploiting in an invisible way can have positive consequences. But anyway, fast forward 2017, a lot of games started changing their business model where they monetized in-app purchases. Basically, they started selling virtual goods and items to players, and that's when I thought, it's time to get out because right now we're kind of overstepping our reach, and we might, be negatively impacting game companies' revenue, which still might be legal but unethical. And there's the option that civil suits might come around because the game company could be like, hey, I'm going to sue you because you hurt my profits by like $1 million this year or something like that. That would be difficult to prove, but in the civil courts it's easier to prove than in the criminal court, and things like that. So, but yeah, that's kind of my view on it. And in a nutshell, it's ethical unless you're hurting somebody.
I totally agree. And the perspective of it's ethical to drive 40 miles an hour in a 30 miles an hour zone, but it's actually illegal, right? In that
Right, yeah.
perspective. Of course, if it's at night with no one in the street and such a thing. So I said I didn't go in the definition of ethics because we'll be there
Right, yeah.
for all day, right? So you mentioned a couple of interesting type of cheats in game, from generating virtual good to boosting your character's level and such a thing. So over your experience, do you see any trends in the type of cheats? Well, mostly MMOs because yeah, that's where your expertise is. I won't go into the single player trainer kind.
Yeah, so I did a talk on this at DEF CON, and I think the title of the talk was 20 years of exploiting online games, better graphics, same exploits. So that's where I think things stand is, the games will improve graphically, the player experience will improve in terms of, during interaction with the game, in terms of graphics and sound and storyline and things like that. But fundamentally, you still have trading systems, you still have resources and currency that are represented by a number, and they'll be vulnerable to things like race conditions, time of creation, time of use, time of deletion, time of use, and things like that. So I think the exploits will continue to work for the foreseeable future. Like I don't see any magic technology that's going to solve an API level issue, or an, depending on language used, like an integer rollover. That's the most common exploit, is an integer rollover, is like, and
It's interesting because on the game design perspective, when you build a game, usually you have to experiment a lot in the context of your market when you want to go in and such a thing. And the rule of thumb is low project risk, high potential revenue in the perspective, high potential income, but not necessarily money. Could be player retention, could be a bunch of other things. So in a model where you iterate small iteration and you try thing, usually you don't invest in the whole analysis of the potential what can go wrong, right? Because yeah, you have an idea, it could be potentially viable, but the time to market is so thin, so small that they will iterate. So of course, those conditions like race condition and it will have to happen because they cannot afford going through all those analysis prior and what can go wrong and such a thing.
Yeah, it's interesting, the time to market angle, because when going after games, we could predict, how likely it is that we're going to be able to find an exploit based on the developer timeline. Like if the management is pushing for this game to be released by Christmas, and the developers, are on Twitter or on social media, they're getting, we're working 20 hours a day, there's no way we're going to finish this game by Christmas, and they launch the game on Christmas, we know that's going to have a lot of exploits.
It's a good. Well, for those who are doing article crowd bounty hunting or such a thing, it's a nice target to monitor, actually.
Yeah, yeah.
One other thing I wanted to mention as we go along is the distribution network. So you mentioned eBay as a reseller. So if you can explain a bit, what were your allies in the dark side that, well, help your business?
Yeah.
Well, let's call that
Yeah.
your business model, or yeah.
Yeah, so the business model, if you're going after an online game to sell virtual goods or items to people, the workflow is typically, you sign up for the game, you play it, you understand how it works. You either use off-the-shelf or custom tools. Typically, it's custom tools to, intercept the protocol, find the exploits in it, and then, if in the morning you find an exploit, in the evening you can be talking to suppliers. And when I mean suppliers is, there's two ways you could go about this. You could sell the virtual goods and items yourself. You could go on like eBay or player auctions currently. Player auctions, and these days is basically like eBay. You put up a bunch of gold for sale in a specific game, and people buy it, and then you have to arrange to meet in game with that person at a specific date and time so you can transfer the gold or goods, which is a high overhead, especially if you're talking about a game that has multiple servers. If you have 500 orders that come in, a single person can't handle it. So typically what you'd want to do is partner with somebody that specializes in this. And currently there's sites out there called like egpanel.com, IGE, and there's many different others where they basically operate out of a country that has lower income. So typically it's China, maybe some South American countries, where you sell your virtual goods wholesale to them, and then they fulfill their orders for you. So what that would look like is you'd stock up an account with a ton of like golden items, and you just give them the credentials to the account so that they could log in and distribute the money and goods as the orders came in. So in a nutshell, that's the way it worked.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, we mentioned about the way the game design and the issues. Without going into too much detail as to protect the guilties, but if you could tell me about the maturity level of companies you meet all those years as far as proactive disclosure and such a thing, but without too much detail because we might hurt some feelings.
You cut out for a second. Are you talking about responsible disclosure?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm sure in those years you were keen to
Okay.
notify
Yeah.
some of those gaming companies.
Okay, without naming names.
Well, you can, but I just
Mhm.
want to avoid.
Yep. So the very first game that I ever went after, I tried to responsibly disclose an issue in the game, and I think this game had a. Well, if I say what the issue was, it'll
Yeah,
be
go
obvious.
ahead.
Right.
I don't think anyone
Right.
will put them.
Yeah. So the game was Ultima Online, and I found a way to basically delete player housing, which was a very high value asset in that game because real estate was a scarce resource. It wasn't instance or anything like you can create an unlimited number of houses. You had the game was on a 2D map, and you had so much land. So if you placed the house actually gained value over time. Was supply and demand market was very much like the real world
Yeah,
real
we
estate
had to
market.
walk a really long time to get into our house.
Yeah, exactly. There's commute factored in and everything. But anyway, I was just examining because Ultima Online patched in a method that you could reclaim your house. So basically, turn your house back into a deed. And I was examining how that workflow worked, and I was like, wait a minute, if you do this thing, then you can deed anybody's house. So you could you could find a castle in the game, and then you could turn it into a deed, which would delete the castle and turn it into a deed in your backpack, which you could sell for a lot of gold. So I found an exploit in that, and I believe I was talking with a GM at the time to be like, hey, this is a really big issue you guys have right here. And this went on for like a week or two. The GM was talking to developers. And then eventually what I learned is the GM got fired because the developers and the upper management thought the GM was helping me, uncover exploits in the game. Because they're like, these are pretty exotic. They never heard of, anything, anybody like spending so much effort into like hacking a game. So they're like, the GM has to be helping them. So they fired the GM, and the outcome of that was pretty messy. I took a retaliatory step and deleted tons of housing on tons of servers. Those are my wild college days. I wouldn't do something like that now. But
But I'm
in the
sure
end, nobody.
you got their attention. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
sure they not took it
I
seriously.
mean, right. We were upset because we were trying to do the right thing, and they did something that was really bad. So we took some retaliation. In the end, nobody got hurt though, because our method was to send a message, and we made sure that the message was loud enough and widespread spread enough that they'd have to roll back the servers. So everybody played over the weekend. Their houses got deleted, but things got rolled back to Friday night where everything was nice and stable. So that was that.
Yeah, that game was seen so many exploits from monster ravaging towns, and they had a couple of issues, but yeah.
Yeah. So we uninstalled the game and never came back to that game after that incident, just because we were so upset with the developers and the whole disclosure process and things like that. Fast forward like a year or two later to maybe 2000, 2001, we were reverse engineering Anarchy Online, found multiple exploits in that one. We were able to find a way to basically create items with any arbitrary stats. So you could create like a gun with like 20 billion firepower, so you kill anything in the game with one hit. We disclosed that to the developers. It started with like their database admin, and we talked with some developers. They came into our IRC channel. We used IRC back in the day. We chatted, we had some fun. We told them how the exploit worked, and then the next day our accounts get banned and they ghost us. So we're like, all right, and we got burned twice in a row. First time we got a GM banned, or I mean fired, which is I guess a real life ban. And then the second time around we get banned from the game. We thought everything was going well, but they just took the info from us and ran. So we got burned twice, and then we never tried to responsibly disclose the company again.
Yeah, I think nowadays publisher and developers are more open to those now because, well, the year pass and most of the big studio now have teams to address those issues, and they take it seriously considering the business model has changed. It's not necessarily a paper month anymore. It's a free-to-play model, and even those MMO and paper month. But yeah, they will value player retention. But it's interesting to see, even on a couple of bug bounty programs we've seen, if you were to figure out, I don't know, a virtual good exploit where you can generate virtual good, the difference between marketing them yourself or the bug bounty, what's your take on
Yeah.
today's options for people who would find some exploit?
So I think the outreach between the game companies and people that are exploiting and cheating their games has improved a lot. But I think the game companies are still ignoring the financial aspect of exploiting online games. And I say that because I think this summer I saw a pretty major exploit that somebody found and they reported it responsibly. And they only got rewarded, I think it was like $5 or $50,000. And I was thinking this is a very low payout based on the impact it had to the game. And if they were to go to the black market or to the shadow market and supply players directly with these virtual goods or currencies that this exploit allowed for, they could make 10, 100 times more. So the bounties are good, but they're not in line with the financial consequences of exploits and the motivations of hackers. It's kind of interesting because if I were to get back into hacking online games, one, it wouldn't be ethical back at hacking because I'd be competing with the game's business model, so I wouldn't go back into it. But if I were, I'd enter into bug bounties as a way to do recon. Be like, hey, maybe I'll get access to test servers, maybe I'll get like a debug client or something like that. I'll have more info, maybe I'll get in contact with developers. So bug bounties are great. They're great for a company's image. They're good for catching the low-hanging fruit, maybe, but for advanced actors that are financially motivated, it's up in there. I don't know. It could be helpful or harmful.
Yeah, I'm not against the bug bounty, but I do agree. Then, if on the red side, if you compare the business model, you apart from the ethics of making money out of someone else's work, but even the company cannot cope because if it doesn't impact its bottom line, right? They won't invest because it would be trying to break the other business model that doesn't really impact themselves. So it depends, I think, on the type of attack and what's the impact on the game developer or publisher, essentially. Yeah, interesting, really interesting stuff. One topic I wanted to address with you, it's the future of gaming. So we've seen over the year a lot of free-to-play games get distributed. You don't have to buy the package to start hacking it, right? And most of those free-to-play games are sitting on the model of in-app purchase, publicity, or other revenue stream, essentially. But going forward, there's a lot of discussion about new game mechanism that gonna hit the market. One that come to mind is user content, user created content, and the way it could be exploited and such a thing. It's funny because I was attending the Mega Migs, the Montreal Pro Gaming conference, and they were even discussion about using blockchain to certify or to sign user assets. I couldn't. Yeah, it just nah. Anyway, that brings me to user created content and user resellable content within game using virtual currency probably as a first. I would suspect that it's not going to be, but it's interesting how this will get us closer to the financial type of threat, right? The financial institution already lived with that. Now, your take on future of gaming?
Yeah, so the current business model is in-app purchases or loot boxes where the game company sells you the item directly or a chance to get that item, which I think loot boxes are interesting because loot boxes are getting banned. I think some countries are outright banning them because it's straight up gambling.
It is gambling. It is.
Right, and which is a funny ethical issue. But anyway, where games are going in the future. So I guess the first one was you buy the box. The second generation monetization model was you buy the box and you buy a subscription. The third generation is in-app purchases or loot boxes. And I think the fourth generation that's coming up right now is going to be, like you said, user-generated content and monetizing player commerce. I think games will come out, especially like sandbox type games where you can like do anything you want inside of them. I think game companies will look at games and online communities as virtual countries, and there will be governance, there will be rules. You will give players the ability to do things, when some of those things will be player-to-player trading, commerce, market houses, and things like that. All things that MMOs had, but the MMOs didn't allow player-to-player trading and things like that. But I think that's where it's going to go, is to treat games as virtual countries, and you basically tax transactions. If somebody creates an epic sword in a game that has epic art, like for example, like let's say one of the top Twitch streamers is live streaming himself forging this epic sword, he'll put it up on an auction house, sell for like $1,000, and the game company is going to take a cut of that. And I think that's where monetization is going, is taxing player-to-player commerce.
And we've seen in games like EVE Online, when taxes was part of the virtual economy, which is completely player generated. So there could be an interesting study case, and I'm sure people have studied the economy of EVE Online at many level, but yeah, taxes was part of it. So in this case was corporation who was tasking his member, but eventually it could be an interesting path on this. The other aspect you mentioned, the streamers, right? So in the now age of ransomware, right, which is the 2020 theme, and I'm sure there've been a couple of talk about ransomware at the ACFES already. So one of the potential abuse case that I'm seeing is really attacking those influencers that's really are marketing the games for the publisher and the developers. So
yeah, I think going after Twitch streamers and things like that wouldn't make sense from the threat actor's perspective, because it would damage pretty much everybody's reputation. It's negative for everybody. But I think the threat actor for streamers and popular figures is going to be just straight up trolling. You're going to have some famous person is going to go on Twitch. They're going to have 1 million viewers. Somebody's going to take the opportunity to put up something obscene on the screen or something like that, or execute, find an exploit in the client where the client is able to execute, code on the operating system, and maybe you'll crypto lock your workstation live, while 1 million people are watching, just for the troll factor of it. So I think trolling is going to be a huge factor, well, especially in UGC, and in terms of performers, streaming to a wide audience. The troll opportunities are going to be irresistible to a lot of trolls that have a lot of free times on their hands, and they have the skills to pull it off.
Yeah, and in the perspective of those game and MMOs being used as a social channel, essentially, and been seen in a couple of cases where those environments serve as discrete chats and other type of communication media, we could see easily someone getting his chat being flooded because, yeah, he's online and he's popular, right?
Yeah. From what I've noticed, like from going after like 20, 25, 30 games, is that the game clients and the game servers are pretty fragile. Like, if you're able to interact with the game protocol at the packet level, if you send malformed packets, or if you send typically a player position value is a float combination, XYZ and float or double notation. If you send malformed data or values that are like outside of expected ranges or outside of the spec that a float can represent, you can crash easily the game server or the game client. So that's something I think that's going to be very common, is people just crashing players' clients by producing malformed UGC, or if somebody's streaming with 1 million people watching, they'll send them a packet that's going to crash their client just to DOS their client for the for the lulz, as they used to say.
Yeah, for user-generated content, we've seen a lot of engine coming out. It's marketed as a game, but itself it allows you to develop mini games within it, and we've seen that coming a lot, and in sandbox like also. So the sharing of those needs to be managed by some sort of
Yeah.
policy and verification online, unless we'll get into real trouble.
Yeah, I think the best example is to look at web browsers, because I think game clients are going to be like web browsers, where they're just going to be pulling down assets and scripts in real time from the game servers. And look at the history of web browsers. There's just dozens of security holes every year, and Google Chrome is basically sandboxing the browser as it's running on your operating system. So I think sandboxing the clients and isolating its interaction with the operating system is going to be a necessary step. But yeah, it's going to be challenging 10, 20 years unless new technology comes out that allows these things to run in like a secure portion of the CPU with memory segmented away from access from everything else.
You're saying that, but it's funny because the streaming services from different platform come to mind. The Stadia one, such a thing, are considered like trusted console essentially. So basically, you'll
Yeah.
have a thin client that stream your game, and protocol are as lean as possible to avoid latency and such a thing. But basically, the game is actually running in a trusted data center, right?
Yeah.
But it has to interact. When we talk about gate mechanics, of course, they're going to be linked toward a social network. They're going to be linked to backend. They're going to be linked to other, safe games, to the cloud and such a thing. We don't know yet what they'll make out of it, but I'm the threat landscape or the surface of attack is still uh, the same, except for the specific client, right?
Yeah, it's going to make things a lot more difficult, but it's not going to eliminate the exploits. Like you could exploit the race condition without interacting with the client at a very low level.
The UI condition.
Right, yeah. As an example, there was this person that reached out to me last year. He asked me for help to responsibly disclose a couple of item dupes in World of Warcraft. An item dupe is basically a way to like duplicate items. And he was able to do this item duplication thing using two different exploits, independent exploits of each other. And each of those exploits you didn't require low-level interaction with the client. It's something you could do with a streaming service because they exploited race conditions. And funny enough, I think World of Warcraft launched a new feature where you could like interact with like some inventory items via a web interface. So he was able to use a combination of like race conditions and doing things at the right times just by interacting point and click interactions with the game client to cause two separate duplication exploits. So, those won't disappear, but they will make things less fun for the people that want to reverse engineer clients and see how they work, because now that's taken out of your hands. So it's more of the boring exploits that, you kind of stumble on by accident.
Yeah, yeah, but it's still considered the security holy grail. Not on my
Yeah.
perspective, but on a executive perspective, in the sense that, yeah, it's gonna be like a console, so it's be a lot more difficult. Now we've seen cheats bypassing hardware feature, security feature of some of the console, and we're banging on a head on trying to figure out how they got the keys, but
Yeah.
I would assume it's, yeah, trusted platform essentially. Our console is still considered magic.
I mean, it reduces the attack surface. It's interesting because the side effects are going to be interesting because it's going to increase the value of those in-game assets if there's not as many suppliers supplying them. So uh, I always like to say that the attackers will take the path of least resistance. So if you move the security boundary away from the game client into the cloud, then people are going to go after cloud services. And attacking hypervisors, attacking the actual services that are hosting them. So the game will evolve. It's a moving target. It's an arms race. So
Yeah, and we see AI being involved too. We've seen a couple of preview of AI-driven dialogues, AI-driven economy, where they gonna generate or destroy items within the game based on trying to maintain the model and such a thing. So uh, they all those emerging technology in the gaming industry will eventually live the exact same thing they face outside of the gaming industry.
yeah,
AR being another interesting one, where you single player cheating is not like too much of a concern, but once you start scrapping or destroying all the Pokemon of everyone, you might raise
well,
some attention.
I mean, the AR is kind of scary because you could do the classical MMO type exploits where you delete create assets or whatever, but you could also interact with the person's visual experience. Like, what if you make somebody nauseous and you make a million people fall over in a popular game? That's dangerous.
And
There's
we've seen physical issue. Well, actually, I think one person died playing Pokemon Go. Not
wow.
specifically bashing on Pokemon Go, but when doing AR risk analysis, it was one of the issue because people were so fond of their device, they just got hit by a car in the street or something like that. But essentially, I do agree. Then modifying others' Pokemon would be quite interesting.
I remember a few years ago there was like I forgot what this was, but it was a famous video that triggered epilepsy in people. I guess it was a video that had like a lot of flashing and lights and stuff, and people would go on troll campaigns to distribute this video as widely as possible. Like, imagine if in VR, like somebody found a way to trigger epilepsy in people and things like that. I mean, it's pretty dangerous stuff when you have like your visual and auditory senses stuck in a virtual land that somebody else can influence to cause you harm. uh, Total dick move, but people are going to do it.
Yep, and like you mentioned earlier, there's not really a evil business case for that, but trolling is still mainstream in pretty much all
Yeah,
interaction model we have.
yeah.
So, any last word for us, or
There's a question
Are
that
we
was
wrapping up?
asked if
I
you.
guess last words is curiosity is the main driver of research. If you're curious, dive into something. It's daunting at first. Like I said, when I first got started, I basically had a basic grasp on basic scripting languages and stuff like that. But your curiosity is going to lead you down rabbit holes that might last months or years. But it's a fun journey, and I'm looking forward to the new technologies that are coming out and how to evaluate how they're going to secure things, and evaluate how they can help people break them more efficiently, because with new technology comes new risks. And I think the cat and mouse game between red and blue is a fun one, and it's going to last for the foreseeable future.
and on my side, on a defense perspective, I think it's important to understand really how it's done. What are the details of the technical attack, but the most valued skill for me is really understanding the business you're in. So if you're in finance, study fraud, understand how people and how the mechanics, the different model. If you're in tech, understand uh, infrastructure related and how the business generate its asset and understand. And in the gaming industry, um, I took on myself to really delve and understand game design, what's the production mechanism, understanding what's the decision making, associated with it, because the main role of a blue team is to evangelize and influence decision making in understanding their risks. So that's my recommendation to everyone here. So thank you very much, Manfred. It's been really awesome. Like always, you're welcome to come back, see us at the Hackfest, talk about something else. So
thank you for having me. Anytime you want to talk about hacking, especially online games, I'm happy to jump on.
I have a couple ideas for you, but well, that's going to be another discussion. So thank you, everyone, Hackfest. I don't know if there's a close button or something, but
yeah, you're all good.
Right,
I don't know if you hear me, Mark. We got some question in the chat. So if you can, everyone move to the Q&A talks. I know there was a question that was not answered about Cyberpunk, so you can go in the Q&A. Make sure that Mark is there. And our next talk is the advanced fuzzing workshops. That's going to start in 10